Here to respond is John Iannarelli, former FBI national spokesperson and a former FBI special agent in charge, and Robert Driscoll, Bob Driscoll, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights. Gentlemen, I thank both of you for coming in. When you hear this late news coming out from Trace Gallagher that one of the two people there wasn't even a full official guard there, it was just an employee, who knows what this person actually did. What does that tell you? Because everything seems just a little too convenient here, and nothing adds up in this case. Mr. Iannarelli, what's your take on it?
Well, thanks, Jason. I will tell you, in having investigated cases before for the FBI involving crimes within the federal prison, there's policies in place, there's system. Having somebody who's not trained to deal with prisoner to be acting as a guard is certainly going to be a violation of that policy. There's no way there can be an exception. The FBI is going to look at everything that was done, policies in place, what was violated, and people are going to be held accountable.
Do we really believe, though, Bob, that people will actually be held accountable? I mean, I've been watching this government. I was chairman of the Oversight Committee. The last thing that I see happen is actually people being held accountable.
It's funny, when I was in government at DOJ, I worked in the Civil Rights Division, and we would come down on a state or county jail or prison with both feet if they didn't have an adequate suicide prevention plan. And so I think it's a little bit embarrassing for the department to have their own Bureau of Prisons involved in something like this. And so I think that's why Attorney General Barr really came out pretty strong in his statement. And I think there'll be, I mean, it depends on what you consider held accountable, but I suspect that there will be people identified that did something wrong, because something like this should not happen at a federally managed facility. I mean, this is not a 3-cell lockup in a small county somewhere that doesn't have the capability of dealing with this. This is where the United States government puts its highest profile prisoners that waiting trial in New York. And, you know, this is an identified suicide risk. There's no way this should happen.
Yeah. Now, John, I talked to a former U.S. attorney who told me, you know what, prosecutors, judges, people that make decisions within the Department of Corrections, they don't give a hoot what the defense attorney says. Oh, let's take him off suicide watch. And then they just magically say, oh, okay, hey, we'll take him off suicide watch because he wants to be. No, nobody's buying that crap.
Obviously, there had to be some serious legal maneuvers, because the reality is, once you're on suicide watch, that problem doesn't go away overnight. Most of these guys who have committed these types of offenses know their life is going to be terrible. They're going to prison for the rest of their life. They're not even going to be liked by the other prisoners. Their life will be in danger. Most of them consider suicide at one point or another. I, in my career, had multiple subjects kill themselves rather than be taken into custody, knowing what they were facing. It's unusual why he was not on suicide watch.
Now, Bob, I don't know if this stat is true, but I heard in one of the previous shows that it was something like only one other person in a period of decades had actually been successful in committing suicide at this particular facility. They're not going to have somebody who was just a couple weeks ago either self-inflicted or trying to commit suicide, suddenly in a cell by himself with no video, without the actual correction officers, not checked for hours, with materials that would allow him to hang himself off a bunk bed? Are you kidding me?
This is what's so inexplicable about it, is that there are, you know, suicide gowns that you can give prisoners that are made out of material that you can't hang yourself with. There are, you know, cells you can have that have literally no place you can string something. You know, even the vents have small air holes. There are things that can be done. And again, in a federal facility, you know, most of these things are structural and procedural, and it has to be that they weren't followed. And it seems like they weren't if they wasn't checked regularly. But I mean, and the attorneys couldn't have had that much of an influence. I mean, I represent Marie Butina, alleged Russian spy. And I mean, I had many conversations when she was incarcerated, and she still is. And, you know, BOP is not going to listen to the lawyer. You have to go to the judge and get a motion because, you know, you're the defense attorney. And they understand that, and they're going to do what they think is best for the prisoner. I mean, just in my example, she was her first 6 weeks in D.C. jail, she was checked every 15 minutes, 24 hours a day, to the point where she couldn't sleep. So clearly, this is something they take seriously with respect to most high-profile prisoners.
No, and her story is another story for another night. But I want to come back to the FBI. What can they do at this point? What are they going to be able to have access to? And what have they already gathered all this information, done all of these interviews, or is this just something that conveniently takes a long time to do?
Well, the FBI is very, very thorough. Clearly, they've already started the investigation, getting the list of names of who needs to be spoken to. They've probably interviewed many of the people already, but they're going to talk to everyone. They're going to look at the evidence. They're going to photograph and examine the scene. They're going to be there for the autopsy and in the actual room when it's being done, as well as have the autopsy records. Nothing's going to be left unaddressed because we don't want this to ever happen, not just in this location, but every other federal facility throughout the country.
And, Bob, what's a reasonable time? When should we actually see if the autopsy is done, as we've heard getting reports, when should we actually see and hear this?
I would say a matter of weeks. This is a fairly, the government moves slowly, but this is a very discreet situation. We're talking about a small number of guards would have had access to him that night. A small number of guards would have been responsible. You interview those people. You look at the procedures. You determine whether or not they're followed. Aside from the forensics of the actual autopsy, I don't see what would take an incredible amount of time in this. That there's no reason for the IG or whoever's dispatched to do this by Attorney General Barr can't come to a conclusion within a number of weeks and then write it up.
No, this is going to be back in the hands of our Inspector General Horowitz, yet again, another high-profile case. They better get to the bottom of this sooner rather than later. This is totally inexcusable. But, John and Robert, I thank you for your expertise in joining us tonight.